I'm Marlon Pierce, and I'm going to be moderator for this panel session on extended developer support. And so our panelists are Choonhan Youn, wave your hand, John Gentle, Shawn Rice, and Mona Wong, so we have the panelists of the panel of the willing. So we also we'll say a little bit more about the program in a minute, but just to give you an idea, we have about a dozen different people who serve some portion of their time as consultants for Science Gateway Community Institute. And we've done about 27 different projects. So we're going to start out today giving you a sample of some of the projects we've done that our panelists have been involved in. And then we're going to turn it over and I have some prepared questions. It becomes a lot more interesting for the panel. I don't care, I don't have to answer the questions. But it becomes a lot more interesting if you have questions, and so we encourage you also to speak up. So there's this, as you may have seen from this morning, there's this strange orange, burnt orange box. I guess that's burnt orange. It has a mic in it that I'll not be throwing, but we'll pass around the room if you have questions. All right, well, let's get started. So again, I'm going to introduce some of the projects that our panel has been working on, and then we'll get to the question and answer session. So first, we have a chat question. Already?
Just checking.
Yeah.
I'm just checking
okay.
everyone is. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So what is extended developer support? So it is a core service provided by the Science Gateways Community Institute, our sponsors of this conference. And the idea is that we have a core of expert consultants who can give a gateway client up to 25% of their time, provide technical expertise for up to a year. So this is to use not as somebody on retainer, but rather to help create a new gateway. We'll see some examples of that. Or upgrade or redesign an existing gateway, add a new capability. We'll see some examples of that. So what's a good EDS consultant? Somebody who is transformational, not just transactional. You don't just put a help tick, nothing against help desk tickets, but it's not a ticketing system. It's a relationship that we hope to build between the consultants and the gateway providers. So a good EDS consultant knows how to build and run a successful gateway. But they're not running their own. They're going to show you how to do it. They're going to share their knowledge with you. So let's now talk about some of the projects that the panel has been involved in. We'll start with John there in the middle. So he was involved in a project to support, he was involved in support for a project called VC3, which essentially, and if I misspeak, the panel can correct me here, but essentially the idea is for VC3, and Rob Gardner's the PI of this, to create an overlay cluster. So if you and I and Nancy all have some resources we want to, at our institutions, we want to add to a collective pool and create a virtual cluster, this project provides that middleware. So it was a middleware project, but they realized that they needed a gateway or a portal interface for literally putting a face on their API. They had a lot of needs in that they didn't have anything. They didn't have a gateway at all to start with. They didn't even have a developer for the project. They had to go hire. That was part of the process, is hiring a developer, spinning that person up, getting them integrated into the project. And so John was there in all phases of this effort. So some of the goals are listed here. I think they're all pretty much met. But basically, not just do some coding, but provide some expertise on what are the best practices for building the interactive, nice web interfaces that they wanted, to help them integrate user authentication mechanisms, provide user profile management, project allocation management. These are all views or interfaces to their API. The next project, so that was a brand new gateway. No, didn't exist at all. John helped that team bring that gateway to into existence. The next is a project called CUBES. CUBES stands for Quantitative Undergraduate Biology Education and Synthesis. So it's, and Shawn Rice is the consultant on this one. He worked a lot with Drew Lamar and Sam Donovan, who were the PIs of the CUBES project. So this was an existing hub. To give you a flavor of this one, they're sharing educational material for undergraduate education in the mathematics or the mathematics needed by biologists. So they've identified that as an important need. And they, I assume, are correct because they get about 10,000 visitors per quarter using their resources. So this was actually an existing hub, but the hub needed some additional features that were important for this project that didn't exist. So they specifically, a big feature of the CUBES hub is to share content and teaching materials. So I want to share this teaching material with you, but I want to make sure that I get my proper credit and attributions, and you can change it and so forth, but let's keep that provenance track. So it turned out to be something that the existing Hub Zero features didn't support well, and so they used Shawn's help to implement these new features. The next project was also along that same theme, an existing gateway, but they needed a major new capability. And Choonhan was the consultant on this one. And so this is the Insides gateway. If you get it, Insides. So it's interactive drug effect gateway. Interactive drug effect gateway. And the PI was Rami Vanguri from Columbia University. So the short version of this is that they had a database that can be used by clinicians and researchers to search for drug effects and interactions. But that's a big combinatorial problem. They couldn't, and they built a database out of things described here, but they couldn't possibly know what and do all the pre-computed interactions that people would want to have. So what they created, or what they asked us to do, and what Choonhan did for them was integrate on-demand computing power so that if somebody wanted a drug interaction that wasn't already in database, the job would be farmed out to the Open Science Grid. Choonhan worked with the Agave team here at TACC and used the Agave API for integrating with the Open Science Grid. And the idea is then that drug interaction will not just be computed for that person that asked for it, but it'll be put in a base and it'll be there for anybody else who asks in the future. And then our last consultant is Mona Wong, who worked with Michael Cianfranco at the University of Michigan on a gateway called Cosmic Squared, which supports cryo-electron microscopy. So the goals of this project, a cryo-EM device, somebody like maybe Mark Miller or somebody can enlighten us if I make a mistake here, but this is something that is an instrument that you might find a handful of them here at TACC, maybe one, maybe two. They're not cheap, but also we're not talking about once the facility level instruments. They have an interesting feature in that they give you extremely detailed information about structures of molecules, but that information comes at a cost, and that these things generate huge amounts of data, terabytes of data per target. And so there's some software also for processing and analyzing the data that you get from these machines, but as you could guess, the software is going to be needed by people who aren't used to supercomputing and who don't really have a good way of, or are probably not going to know a good way of moving terabytes of data from their lab where it was collected to someplace that has the computing power. I hope that sounds like a gateway to you. All right. So Mona and Choonhan both worked on this project to support Michael, and they built the gateway on top of the Workbench framework that is behind the Cypress Gateway and the Neuroscience Gateway. And they also didn't just stop there, but they made it better and contributed back to that open source project by integrating in Globus Cloud Platform services for authentication and file transfer. And as a direct result of Mona and Choonhan's work, Michael Cianfranco got an assistant professor job. Okay, thanks, Nancy. He didn't really, but he you know, it's correlation. There's a correlation there. He was assisted, and now he's assistant professor. And he also, but more seriously, he did as part of developing this gateway, which Choonhan and Mona helped him with, win an NSF ABI award, I believe, to offer this as a service to his community. Gateway here didn't exist before, obvious need. We built it, and it's now up to Michael to transform his community. And then lastly, Mona also provided a nice set of a summary table here of some other projects she's been involved in. So besides Cosmic Square, there's the Enigma Bipolar Disorder Gateway, which was a gateway to help Lisa Eiler, the PI, collect human brain data, no HIPAA or other types of concerns around this data, but collect some of this data from her colleagues who were around the world and make sure it was collected in a nice, efficient, cleaned up way. And so a relatively small targeted project. Then CADA, which also had a lot of work from Steve Snyder along with Mona, that's a project that wanted to provide a service for analyzing internet traffic. So this is a CADA project that is out of UC San Diego. So they had an old service called AS Rank that previously could support 8 simultaneous users, and it had a fine 1997 user interface and architecture. So Mona and Steve worked with a team to develop modern user interface and significantly upgrade the backing services and database. So they went from 8 at a time to currently our analytics are showing that they have about 6,000 unique users per month. So when you scale up orders of magnitude, that's usually considered a success. All right, so those are the introductions for the panel. And so now we have some questions, but before we get to my questions, I want to stop and say and ask if any of you have questions that you would like to have some feedback on or any observations. Nancy?
All right, Nancy, you get the cue.
All right. The PI has a question, so.
There you go.
I want to ask the panelists, to say anybody who feels like they want to answer, but what's the most challenging thing when you first get started with one of these projects? So you've got all different disciplines, some that you might not have the background in from a domain side. How do you begin those conversations with the PIs to kind of move forward?
Yeah. So let's start. How about Mona? We start with you and we work across the stage.
I think maybe I wouldn't call it most challenging, but I think the start of conversation is to just have an interest in what they're doing, trying to learn what I can about what they're trying to accomplish, and then offer myself as an assistant and integration part of their team. So so that the relationship building process, I think, yeah.
I think Mona pretty much covered what I was going to say. It's pretty much just coming up to speed with what their goals are and figuring out kind of where they're coming from. And once you kind of get a little bit of their perspective, I think it really helps. Like, okay, this is actually a really neat project. I want to dive in and see how I can help them.
Yeah, this is going to be really hard for you. Everyone's going to answer everything. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could add to that would be, just kind of assessing the individual team members' skill sets and who's going to actually be working on which pieces of what, and kind of just defining lanes so that you have some idea of who's responsible, who you need to contact, and also just kind of the general expectations for pacing and getting familiar with their workflow and getting integrated into them as kind of like an informal team member. That's kind of the biggest thing to earn the trust of the group, so to speak.
Yeah, in my case, usually, yeah, difficult part is to communicate with, they're like different like professionals across, some like science domain, So, but, first of all, before starting, this work, I asked them, do you have any kind of, reference or paper or, first of all, I try to read those kind of materials. Then, we just got through the like a meeting, we just adjust, our task, for science gateway. So this is my just ways.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So yeah, feel free to interrupt our flow of questions here, but I'll get started with the ones that we have prepared. So, and we'll start with Choonhan and go the other way. So what are the characteristics in your mind of a successful consultation?
Yeah, for my experience, within SGCI, I have done, 2 like clients and then going on 1 client. So usually like, PI is a little bit kind of active, So that means like they just like, yeah, via the email or like, via the like Google chat, they ask me about like, what is this? And how do we like solve these problems? And there's something like that, So usually like a PI is very active, This is my, yeah, experience. Yeah.
Okay, so successful portal consultation, that was the question.
That's right.
I guess generally, of course, clearly meeting the kind of defined goals that you had at the beginning of the consultation as an objective. Sometimes you hit all of them and sometimes you only hit a few of them. It just depends on the complexity of the goal and the capability of the team and how everything falls together. I was very lucky with VC3 where everything pretty much hit the point because the team was extremely exceptional. And the young developer that was consulting primarily was like headfirst in. So he was always available and readily there. So that would probably, for me, the most important thing is establishing very clear lines of communication and knowing who I can reach out to at any moment so that we can never end up in a position of work stoppage or confusion about what the next objective is to complete. That was, for me, a primary outcome.
For me, one of the things it's really nice to see is the actual feature of in this case, we're adding a feature to an existing product. Seeing that feature actually getting used. I've managed to keep an eye on that particular hub for over the past year and just see that nice ramp up curve of more and more people actually using that feature and seeing it become more and more of kind of almost a daily process or something that a lot of the users really enjoy using. So that was nice to see. Okay.
No, you have to say something.
Ditto.
Okay. We'll start with Mona next time. All right. So if you think any of these questions are too softball-esque, and then it's your job to come up with tough ones. Okay, next. Mona gets to start. What are the skills that you think are needed to be an effective consultant?
I think really communication, the soft skills, and that's what I'm finding through a lot of these consultations is that I'm confident in sort of my technical abilities, but which I guess you have to have, but also being able to effectively communicate and listen to what they're saying really helps, because having a good relationship really makes the project go so much smoother and faster. Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree on that. And building on that, I'd also say a little bit of sort of those project management kind of skills can really help. I mean, in your day-to-day work life, you're always doing some of that, managing your time, figuring out what to work on next, and so on. But in this case, you're also managing somewhat the client's expectations and making sure you don't run away and get feature creep and so on. So some of those project management skills I think really come into play.
Yeah, this is tough now. So ditto. And I guess I could add to that is also just an ability to, be open to whatever techniques or technology or workflows that the client is interested in pursuing. It can be easy to come in and kind of want to impose the way you do things on the project. Or in some cases, if they don't have a way to say, this is how you do it. And that's very tempting, but oftentimes you got to find that you've got to be able to navigate that path through to them to find what is actually effective and efficient for that group. So it kind of reflects back to the soft skills and the PM kind of combining together to define the process by which the consultation is going to, I guess, come to life and proceed. So I would say that.
Yeah, I think, most of your opinion agree. But, sometimes, I feel like a project scope is a little bit higher abstract, and then, it's a little bit like broad, How do I make, concrete plan to split out, several tasks assigned to, each teams? I think this is must, need more skills, build communications, I think.
Questions? I've got more. We'll start with Wong. What are the biggest challenges you face as an EDS consultant?
Let's see. For me, part of it is just the fact that I have a whole other job. So you're doing all this other work over here, and then you might completely be switching gears and working on maybe a completely unrelated product or goals for everything else. And along with that comes all the normal rigmarole, if I can say that word, of managing your time, making sure you're keeping on top of things. Your clients, sometimes, they have whole other projects they're working on, and they can lose track of things, and you have to be kind of pleasantly persistent and so on. Yeah.
Great. And John?
The middle. For me, the biggest challenge has been just the scale of the complexity of the parts of the projects, the diversity of what they're dealing with. On the VC3 project, it was extensive because we had to I had to quickly spin up on understanding the goals of the entire backend API service and all the middleware that scaffolded up all of these clusters, and how they were doing that and which technologies they were using and the processes and workflows that they were implementing, so that I could then help the front-end developer to understand how to represent or communicate that information back to their target audience. And there was definitely a lot of back and forth to try to clarify what pieces were actually important and what pieces we want to hide from people, and just making sure that I was on the right page interpreting what they're doing, or even in some cases just learning about the technology for the first time. So absorbing all of that information in a relatively short period of time, and then trying to turn around and turn that into a meaningful project management plan, and then actually execute on that is pretty task intensive, especially when you do have other jobs.
Yeah, in my case, usually, so like some PI, project, ask me some like, different like technology, which, I don't know. So this means, or like something, I tried, evaluate this kind of system, something like that. So sometimes, this technology, this means I don't understand what technology exactly, to use it for them, So this means like a little bit kind of, need takes time for me, I guess.
So I think personally, the project switching, because I have 3 to 4 projects that each had 25%. And if there's development on the project, you kind of, at least for me, I need big blocks of time to sit down, think about what I need to code and test and debug and all that. So the switching of the projects takes a lot of sort of mental ability to do that switch. I mean, meditation helps me a lot, I have to confess. But also, I think, like what he was saying about project management upfront, letting the PI know that here are what I normally do in terms of time rotation. I try to do like 2.5 days per project. So I rotate on a 2-week kind of a timeline. And I let them know what that is and if that's okay. And most PIs are, grateful for the free support. And so they're happy with that and they can work with that. And so, yeah, I think that is the most challenging, is that mental switching between projects.
Oh, yeah, Nancy?
Sorry, Nancy, you're gonna get the cue again. I know. We should do the throwy thing.
You can come up here if you want.
No. So we have a lot of students in the audience. I wonder if you could just talk about your educational background, but also the career paths that led you to where you are now, and kind of how you're happy with what you're doing now. And it's fair to say, really, I don't think you should do this. But just some of that background so the students can appreciate what led you to this.
Yeah, go ahead. Whoever wants to go.
Okay. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. And I think a love of science is really important. And I love that I can use my computer science skills to help researchers. And I also get to learn a little bit about research and about the world that's around us, because it's a very interesting world. And so I think I've been developing software for a long time, and was very happy, that I started at SDSC, I think maybe about 11 years ago. And I've been there since, because, they emphasize on science and openness, which is awesome. And then when Nancy got this SGCI thing about science gateways, I was like, that's my home. So I think just having an interest and a curiosity about the world really helps. And then the faith that you can do whatever you want to do.
Okay. Let's see, my bachelor's is actually in computer graphics with a master's in IT, and right up to the point of trying to decide what to do in college, it was either paleontology or something with graphics. So 2 very, very, very different kind of routes there. But the paleontology thing is still always an interest in it. I've always had this love for science, just like Mona said. So that kind of helps feed into things there, I think. And also just a love for doing coding and all of that, kind of a lot of different things there. And right after getting the master's is when I started working on what would become HubZero. So I've been working on the HubZero platform for about 13 years. And then next thing I know, we're part of the Science Gateway stuff, and I'm being told, hey, you're going to do EDS work. So I'm like, all right. And yeah.
Okay, so I had an arduous path to get here. My background was originally, actually, I did not start in computer science. I started as a music performance major for about 8 years. And then after getting tired of ramen, I went back to school and got a degree in information system security. And then I also got some emphasis in multimedia and other things like that. So after I graduated, I came to Austin and I got hired at UT. And originally I did basically kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum development and interactive online courses for UT, which allowed me to use my love of animation and multimedia and film and audio production, but also allowed me to do something on the computer and get fed. And so then from there, it just kind of was one thing after the other. I ended up doing some virtual simulation training projects for the Army, and then moved on to doing some medical simulation support projects for Army as well, and the medical units. And then from there, I transitioned eventually to working in hydrogeology and doing some data viz there. And then finally ended up at TACC, where I at first was building kind of just static portals for data set discovery on some of the data collections that TACC houses. And then eventually moved into working on the actual portals for TACC. So, and yeah, and it's been a fantastic journey, and I love to learn new stuff. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, my background is in computer science. At the first time, I worked with Marlon Pierce at the Indiana University before. So I think I just got a job at San Diego Supercomputing Center. At that time, geoscientists hired me. My background also related to earthquake modeling, computational portals. So I think after that, I just also like did a lot of related to information, cyber infrastructure projects. So yeah, just like a tropical, biology, and then also like for the related to GIS, cyber GIS projects. So my background, has a lot of advanced cyber infrastructure research. Yeah.
Great. Other questions? Okay. Yeah. Question back here?
Here you go. Oh, wow. This is going to be challenging. Well, let's see.
Hi, yeah. So my question is, when you work with a PI on a project, what should a PI do or not do in order for the collaboration to work really smoothly?
I guess it's my turn. In my experience, really, I mean, as long as we can, communicate clearly what their goals for their project are, that's the main thing I'm looking for. Is I just want to. I don't expect the PI to be kind of in the weeds with us every day, as it were. I generally expect them to kind of give me the big picture and say, this is where we want to get to, and this is who's helping you get where, and where I need help. So if they can come in with some clear definition of their problem points, that's the best thing, because then we know where to focus. But it's not always the case. Sometimes you don't know what your problem points are and you just say, I want to get here and I don't know how. So, but either way, as long as those expectations can be clearly defined, then we're pretty much good to go after that, as long as we can, get along well. But that's it for me.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I don't know their science, exactly, but, I just, gave some, several questions, for example, like where your applications are run. So like this is supercomputer or local desktop, and then, as well as what is your output? This is a data size, depending on these kind of factors, I try to find, existing good, gateway platforms. Which one is like, this is just like, for my evaluation, and then, recommend, those technologies to them.
Yeah. I was actually just going to say, I think John pretty much took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, having the PI have a very clearly defined goal or what it is they're actually hoping to achieve is probably one of the biggest things out there. And then I would also probably add on to that is maybe have a little bit of, I guess, trust in, you know, the EDS consultant, that they kind of know what they're talking about and so on. And obviously you can always have differing opinions and things on stuff, but just kind of be aware that they have a background in something that they're working on. And that's why they were probably assigned that project, kind of thing. So yeah. Ditto.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, I didn't want to talk too much about our processes, or not all, but we do, when somebody asks for support, one of the first steps is to develop a reasonable work plan to get you through the first 6 months. And that may or may not be what you actually do, but that's sort of a gate for us to see, you know, is this person, do they have a good, well-defined plan that they want to execute on? And if they need to correct it or change it, that's fine. But that's one of the first things that we try and establish before we get too far down the road. Okay. 5 minutes. So happy to take other questions. Oh, Rick.
Sorry. Here you go. Sure.
So I looked this thing up. It's like $600, so I better not drop it. So quick question. You're in a really interesting position. You are consulting engineers, essentially, with kind of a diverse portfolio. And so I'm kind of wondering, software projects have a long history, let's put it that way. And there are a whole set of tools that you use in software projects, and there are a whole set of tools that you use for project management, and there are a whole set of tools that you learn when you're a consultant. So I'm just wondering if any of you have a kind of short list of best practices or tools or whatever that you use. I mean, I think you've hit all the obvious problems, but now what are the kind of official things that you bring to the table to deal with those?
Well, I suppose partially tool-wise, one of the things we do actually to track these projects is we use Jira, which has a nice task management tracking and all that. That I think is really helpful, as well as I think it has, well, I know it has time logging and all of that. Keeping track of your time, I think, is very important. That's always kind of a problem. You just work on something for 5 hours and you think, oh, you do it, you know, a week later, you're like, oh, I guess I worked 3 hours on that. I don't know. So keeping, I think, consistent and making sure you do certain things. Like for me, at the end of the day, make sure I write down or track how much time I worked on what and what task I did and so on, just because I'll forget it by the next morning, kind of thing. So. Jira, J-I-R-A.
I don't have a whole lot of high-tech stuff, but one thing that I find really useful is Google Docs to collaborate with the team about various pieces of information, and also to meet regularly. So some kind of a web meeting thing. Google Hangout is one that if the team doesn't have access to anything else, we do that. And the Open Science Foundation is one that I use to also, in a sort of private way, because they allow you to log in access rather than Google Doc, which is pretty open. They allow you to deposit data, files, and wikis and so forth. So I use that for a couple of my projects to keep track of information, lists, documents, and stuff like that. And then, you know, it's just regular email, and some teams use Slack. So some projects have their own team. So I usually use whatever it is that they're already using. And then other ones, mostly like Google Doc and Open Science Foundation if they're interested in doing that. So I try not to force any tools on them, see what they have, but there are some things that are helpful.
Yeah, so all of those, and also, you know, most of these are software projects, so some sort of version control system is mandatory. Generally, I recommend GitHub just because it's free and open, or Bitbucket, either one of those. Most teams usually already have something set up one way or the other. Now there's some other on-premise setups like GitLab, things that some organizations are establishing. So we don't force a technological choice. We just say, what are you using? Then there's a gap. Then I put forth a series of recommendations and say, you're going to need at least one of these. Please pick one so that we can, see what you like, or give them a whirl. But yeah, Google Docs, Zoom and Skype also for video or teleconferencing are helpful. A lot of places have those. Yeah, I mean, plain old snail mail or email even at times if necessary. And although I didn't have it in my first consultation, on my current consultation, we've actually had a few face-to-face meetings, which was very useful because it helps you bridge a lot of barriers that, are difficult to transition past if you only see each other as tiny little squares on a screen once every week or two. So that's important too.
Yeah.
Ditto.
You can say that. Yeah.
So, a good strategic ditto since we are less than 1 minute. So I'll skip ahead. I had some other questions that I won't inflict. I would like to say in conclusion, you can request support, this URL. We'll be happy to show you this later. We have, you can just email help@sciencegateways.org if you'd like to talk first. If I could whisper, we're hiring if you like this sort of thing. We're happy to follow up. If you have other questions, you see the panelists. I say, we're a virtual team. This is actually the first time many of us have met face to face. And so that says something to the quality of the people on the stage and other consultants about how effective they are at working remotely with these widely distributed teams. So join me in thanking the panel, please.